For generations, my family name, Beaumont, was synonymous with medicine. We weren't just doctors, we were a dynasty. The Beaumont Clinic wasn't just a hospital, it was a monument to our legacy, a towering glass and steel testament to 100 years of healing. My great-grandfather founded it, my grandfather expanded it, and now my uncle Marcus runs it. I was supposed to be next in line. I had the grades, the aptitude, the pedigree, but I didn't have the stomach for it. Not for the blood, but for the pressure. The weight of a century of expectation felt like a physical thing, a stone on my chest that made it hard to breathe. In my third year of medical school, I walked out of my board exams and never went back. The family summit that followed was less of a conversation and more of a tribunal. My father, his face a mask of cold disappointment, informed me that I was no longer a Beaumont in anything but name. My mother cried, not for me, but for the social standing she felt I had torched. But it was my uncle Marcus who delivered the final cutting blow. He stood before the fireplace in my father's study, a glass of expensive scotch in his hand, and he smiled. It was a thin, predatory smile. "It's for the best," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "The family legacy requires strength, not whatever this is." He gestured at me, a dismissive flick of his wrist that erased my entire existence. They called me the family disgrace, and from that day on, they treated me like a ghost, a rumor of a failure they preferred to ignore. They cut me off, expecting me to come crawling back, begging for a second chance. But they underestimated me. They always did. What they didn't know was that I never stopped studying. I just changed my field. Freed from the rigid curriculum of medical school, I dove headfirst into the subjects that truly fascinated me: toxicology and botany. I built a small state-of-the-art lab in a converted greenhouse behind the modest house I rented on the outskirts of the city. While my cousin Julian, Marcus's perpetually praised son, was learning how to diagnose the flu, I was learning how the venom of the blue-ringed octopus shuts down the nervous system. While he was being celebrated for completing his residency, I was deep in the Patagonian mountains on a research grant, documenting undiscovered flora. That's where I found it. Aconitum novellis cordis. The locals called it the silent heart flower, a beautiful, deceptively delicate-looking plant with deep purple petals. I spent 6 months studying it, isolating its primary alkaloid. It was a neurotoxin of breathtaking elegance and lethality. It didn't just stop the heart, it induced a state of chaotic, uncontrolled fibrillation that was a perfect, untraceable mimic of a massive coronary event. Standard toxicology screens would find nothing. A coroner would see the damage, see the classic signs of cardiac arrest, and sign the death certificate without a second thought. It was the perfect weapon. I published my initial findings in a niche botanical journal under a pseudonym, logged the plant's genome, and moved on. It was a fascinating academic curiosity, nothing more. Or so I thought. A year later, the news broke about the sudden death of Jonathan Hayes, a major shareholder in a tech firm that was partnering with the Beaumont Clinic on a new medical data venture. Hayes was 52, fit, a marathon runner. He died of a massive, unexpected heart attack. My uncle Marcus gave a somber, heartfelt quote to the press about the tragedy of it all. 6 months after that, another partner, a woman named Sofia Petrova, also died. Another sudden, shocking heart attack. She was 48. Marcus once again expressed his profound sadness, and then quietly, through a series of shell corporations, his holding company acquired the shares of both deceased partners, giving him controlling interest in the joint venture. That's when a cold dread began to creep up my spine. It was a hunch, a whisper in the dark, but I couldn't shake it. They call me the family disgrace. They think I'm a failure, a weak link who couldn't handle the pressure. What they don't know is that I'm the only person on the entire planet who knows what Aconitum novellis cordis can do, and because of that, I'm also the only person who knows how to create the antidote. My uncle thinks he's a genius, a puppet master pulling strings in the shadows, untraceable and untouchable. He's about to find out that the family disgrace is the only one who can cut them. The immediate aftermath of my departure from medical school was a brutal, echoing silence. The phone calls stopped, the invitations to family dinners, to holidays, to the annual Beaumont Foundation gala, they all evaporated. It was as if a switch had been flipped, and the light of my family's regard, conditional as it had always been, was extinguished completely. My father, a man I had spent my entire life trying to please, would cross the street to avoid me if he saw me in public. It was a stark, public shunning. I became a ghost in my own city. At first the pain was a physical thing. It was a hollow ache in my chest, a constant lump in my throat. I would lie awake at night, replaying the scene in my father's study over and over. Marcus's smug smile, my mother's tears of shame, my father's stony face. It was a masterclass in psychological annihilation. I remember one particular afternoon, about a year after I'd been cast out. It was my birthday. I didn't expect a call, not really, but a small, stupid part of me hoped. The part that still remembered my mother fussing over a cake, or my father giving me a stilted but genuine hug. The phone stayed silent all day. I bought myself a cupcake from a corner bakery and ate it alone in my small apartment, the silence of the room pressing in on me. That was my low point. The moment I truly understood that I was utterly, completely alone. It was in that crushing loneliness that the anger began to smolder. It wasn't a hot, explosive rage, but a cold, dense fury that settled deep in my bones. They hadn't just disowned me, they had tried to erase me. They had judged my entire worth based on one single narrow definition of success, a definition they had written and I had failed to embody. It was that cold fury that fueled me. I poured every ounce of my energy into my new passions. I worked odd jobs, tutoring undergraduates in chemistry, landscaping, anything that paid the bills, and left my mind free. Every spare dollar went into my lab. The greenhouse I rented was dilapidated, its glass panes clouded with age, but to me it was a sanctuary. It was the one place where I wasn't the Beaumont Disgraces. I was just Elias, a scientist. I filled it with hydroponic towers, centrifuges bought secondhand, and gas chromatographs I painstakingly repaired myself. It smelled of damp earth, ozone, and the sharp, clean scent of ethanol. It was the smell of my new life. The flashbacks to my time in medical school were relentless back then. I'd be calibrating a pH meter, and suddenly I'd be back in anatomy lab, the scent of formaldehyde stinging my nostrils, the weight of expectation making my hands tremble. I remembered the endless litany of names, diseases, and procedures we were forced to memorize. It wasn't about healing, not really. It was about prestige. It was about maintaining the Beaumont Clinic's top ranking, about publishing more papers than our rivals, about billing more hours. My professors, many of them on the Beaumont payroll, talked about patients as if they were complex puzzles to be solved, not people to be cared for. I remember one patient in particular, a Mr. Gideon, an elderly man with a complex heart condition. I was a student observer on rounds with my uncle Marcus. Mr. Gideon was scared. He kept asking questions, trying to understand what was happening to his own body. Marcus was impatient, his answers curt and dismissive. He spoke in jargon Mr. Gideon couldn't possibly understand, his tone dripping with condescension. Later in the hallway, Marcus clapped me on the shoulder. "You see, Elias," he said, "the key is authority. They don't need to understand. They need to trust that we understand. It's about managing perceptions." He wasn't teaching me medicine. He was teaching me theater. He was teaching me how to project an aura of infallibility, the very thing that I, with all my doubts and anxieties, could never fake. That memory, more than any other, solidified my decision to leave. I didn't want to be that kind of doctor. I didn't want to be that kind of man. The trip to Patagonia was my escape and my rebirth. The grant I'd won was small, but it was enough. For 6 months I was surrounded by a different kind of pressure, the immense crushing silence of the mountains. I hiked for days, my only companions, the wind and the soaring condors. It was there on a remote, windswept plateau that I found the silent heart flower. It was so unassuming, nestled between jagged rocks. I knew it was a species of aconitum, or monkshood, a genus known for its potent poisons. But this one was different. I spent weeks carefully documenting it, taking samples of the root, the stem, the petals. Back in my base camp tent, with a portable analysis kit, I did the initial workup. The alkaloid it produced was structurally unique. I named it Aconitum NC for Novellus cordis. I remember the thrill of discovery, the pure unadulterated joy of finding something new, something no one else had ever seen. It was a feeling of worth that had nothing to do with my family name. It was mine alone. I synthesized a tiny microscopic amount of the purified toxin. The tests I ran on isolated porcine cardiac cells were terrifying. The toxin didn't just cause a heart to stop, it made the muscle fibers contract erratically, chaotically, in a way that would look, on any EKG, like a textbook ventricular fibrillation event, leading to cardiac arrest. It was undetectable because it wasn't a foreign substance that lingered, like arsenic or cyanide. It was a key that fit a specific lock in the sodium channels of the heart muscle. It turned the key, caused the chaos, and then the molecule itself degraded into benign, untraceable organic compounds within an hour. It was a ghost, a perfect phantom killer. I wrote up my data, submitted it to the Journal of Obscure Botanical Compounds under a pseudonym to avoid any connection to the Beaumont name, and put it away. Years passed. I built a quiet life. I started a small business, cultivating rare orchids and medicinal plants for universities and research labs. It was a modest living, but it was honest. It was mine. The sting of my family's rejection had faded into a dull scar. And then I saw the news report about Jonathan Hayes. The phrase massive unexpected heart attack snagged in my brain. Hayes was one of the few partners in the new venture who had been vocal about ensuring ethical oversight, a thorn in my uncle's side. I felt a flicker of unease. Then 6 months later, Sofia Petrova, she had been Hayes's staunchest ally on the board. Another unexpected heart attacks. That was when the flicker of unease became a raging fire. My blood ran cold. It couldn't be. How could Marcus possibly know about my discovery? The journal was obscure, my pseudonym untraceable. I tore my small house apart, searching for my old research notes from the Patagonia trip. I found the hard drive, encrypted and password protected. I opened the file containing my final report, the one I'd never published, the one that detailed the synthesis process. The file's access log showed one entry after my last save, a download from an IP address that I didn't recognize. The date was 3 years ago, shortly after I returned from my trip. I ran a trace. It was a dead end, routed through a dozen shell servers, but the origin point was a terminal with privileged access to the Beaumont Clinic's internal network. The realization hit me like a physical blow. They hadn't just disowned me. They had been watching me. My uncle, with his vast resources and his IT department, had likely flagged my name on any academic or grant-related network traffic. He must have seen my grant proposal for the Patagonia trip, seen my interest in novel alkaloids. He had hacked my research. He had stolen my discovery, not for the sake of science, but to turn it into a weapon. The man who called me weak, the man who called me a disgrace, had stolen my work and was using it to murder people. That was the catalyst. The cupcake on my birthday. That was my low point. This was my point of no return. The dull scar of my rejection split wide open, and what poured out was not pain, but ice. It wasn't about revenge until it was. It was no longer about my hurt feelings or my lost inheritance. It was about Jonathan Hayes and Sofia Petrova. It was about the next person on my uncle's list. He had used my knowledge to kill. I would use my knowledge to stop him. The family disgrace was about to become the family's reckoning. My resolve hardened into something diamond sharp. I went into my lab, the one place on earth that was truly mine, and I locked the door. The time for hiding was over. The game was on. My first step was to find an ally. I couldn't do this alone. My uncle was a pillar of the community, a celebrated physician with a team of lawyers on retainer. I was a college dropout with a greenhouse. If I walked into a police station with a story about a secret plant from Patagonia and a hacked hard drive, they'd laugh me out of the building. I needed someone with credibility, someone who understood the science and who wouldn't be intimidated by the Beaumont name. My mind immediately went to one person, Dr. Lena Petrova. I had met Lena at a botanical symposium a couple of years back. She was brilliant, a biochemist with a focus on plant-derived compounds, and she worked for a rival pharmaceutical research firm. We had bonded over a shared frustration with the pace of academic publishing and a mutual love for rare, thorny plants. But there was another reason I thought of her. Sofia Petrova, the second of my uncle's partners to die, was Lena's aunt. I hadn't made the connection at first, but now, the name screamed at me from the recesses of my memory. Finding her wasn't hard. I tracked her down at her lab. She was hesitant at first. Her eyes narrowed with suspicion when I told her I needed to talk about her aunt's death. She was a woman who was used to dealing with corporate sharks and intellectual property thieves. I didn't try to convince her with a wild story. I just showed her the data. I laid out my research on aconitine in C, the chromatograph readings, the cellular decay models. I showed her the EKG simulations, how the toxin's effect was a perfect, indistinguishable copy of a natural heart attack. She was silent for a long time, her eyes scanning the complex molecular diagrams. I could see the gears turning in her brilliant mind. The coroner's report said it was her heart, she said, her voice barely a whisper. They said it was genetic, undiagnosed. We had no reason to doubt it. They wouldn't, I said, no one would. This toxin isn't in any database. The machine that could detect it hasn't been programmed to look for it, because as far as the world knows, it doesn't exist as a weapon. Then I showed her the final piece of evidence, the IP address trace from my hard drive, leading back to the Beaumont clinic. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, not just understanding, but a familiar cold anger. My father, she began, her voice tight, was a chemical engineer. He developed a new process for synthesizing a cancer drug. A major pharmaceutical company, one with ties to your uncle's hospital, got him tied up in a patent lawsuit. They bled him dry, legally. They claimed his process was their intellectual property. They broke him. He died of a stroke a few years later. My aunt Sophia, she was helping me build a case. She was looking into their financials, trying to prove they had a pattern of corporate raiding through legal and unethical means. The pieces clicked into place. Sofia Petrova wasn't just a business partner, she was a threat. And now Lena had inherited that fight. Our motivations, born from different betrayals, had converged on the same man, Marcus Beaumont. It wasn't about revenge for her either, not entirely, it was about justice. From that moment on, she was my partner. Her lab had equipment I could only dream of, and she had access to resources that were beyond my reach. More importantly, she believed me. Our secret plan began to take shape, not in my dusty greenhouse, but in her gleaming state-of-the-art lab after hours. Our first priority was proof. We needed an undeniable link. Lena, using her professional credentials, managed to obtain a copy of the full autopsy reports for both Jonathan Hayes and her aunt. They were exactly as I'd predicted, clean toxicology, classic signs of cardiac failure. But Lena also managed to get her hands on something else. The archived biopsy samples taken during the autopsies. Tiny slivers of cardiac tissue, preserved in paraffin blocks and stored deep in a hospital archive. It was a long shot. The toxin was designed to degrade, but I had a theory. The degradation process itself might leave a faint, specific signature, a subtle change in the protein structure of the heart cells that only someone who knew exactly what to look for could identify. It was like looking for the shadow of a ghost. For weeks we worked in secret. Lena would acquire the samples through official research requests, citing a new study on undiagnosed genetic cardiomyopathies. By day she was a respectable biochemist. By night we were a two-person forensic team. The work was painstaking. We used mass spectrometry, electron microscopy, techniques that were overkill for a standard autopsy. We were looking for a needle in a haystack made of needles. I remember the night we found it. It was almost 3 in the morning. We were both exhausted, bleary-eyed from staring at data streams. I was running a comparative analysis between the samples from Hayes and a control sample. Suddenly, an anomaly appeared on the screen. A tiny, almost imperceptible peak in the spectral data. A protein marker that shouldn't have been there. "Lena," I said, my voice hoarse. "Get over here." I ran the same analysis on her aunt's sample. The same peak appeared. It was there. Faint, but undeniable. The ghost had left a shadow. It wasn't enough to convict anyone in a court of law, not yet. But for us, it was everything. It was confirmation. We weren't chasing a conspiracy theory. We were hunting a murderer. With the proof in hand, our focus shifted to the next, more critical phase, the antidote. My research in Patagonia had been focused on the toxin, not its cure. I knew theoretically how to create one. The toxin worked by binding to a specific type of sodium ion channel in the heart. An antidote would need to be a competitive antagonist. A molecule with a similar shape that could muscle the toxin out of the way and bind to the receptor without activating it, allowing the heart to reset its rhythm. The theory was simple. The synthesis was a nightmare. The aconitin NC molecule was complex, a delicate lattice of carbon rings. Building its benign twin was like trying to assemble a ship in a bottle in the dark. It required rare chemical precursors, multi-stage reactions under precise temperatures and pressures, and a level of purification that my small lab couldn't handle. This is where Lena's resources became indispensable. "I can get the precursors," she said, her face grimly determined. "My company has accounts with every major chemical supplier in the world. I'll bury the orders in a dozen different project budgets. They'll never notice." It was a huge risk for her. If she got caught, she'd lose her job, her career, and could even face criminal charges for corporate espionage. I told her she didn't have to. She just looked at me, her eyes hard. "They took my aunt. They ruined my father. This isn't just your fight anymore, Elias. They think we're just scientists. They're about to find out what that means." So began the most intense period of my life. We turned her lab into our secret factory. We worked through nights and weekends, fueled by coffee and a shared sense of cold purpose. I would run simulations on my computer, modeling the molecular interactions, trying to find the most stable and effective structure for the antidote. Then we would attempt the synthesis. The first few attempts failed. The compound was unstable, degrading almost immediately. Another batch yielded a molecule that was inert, useless. It was frustrating, demoralizing work. During this time, I became a ghost in a different way. I was a phantom, haunting the edges of my uncle's world. I started monitoring him, not just online, but in the real world. I used my knowledge of botany and landscaping to get a part-time job with a service that maintained the corporate parks in the city, including the one where the Beaumont Clinic's administrative offices were located. Dressed in a groundskeeper's uniform, I was invisible. I could watch the comings and goings, see who he was meeting with, learn the rhythms of his power. It was from this vantage point that I identified his next target, a man named Alistair Caldwell. Caldwell was the last remaining original partner in the joint venture. He was old school, a shrewd and deeply skeptical businessman who had resisted Marcus's attempts at a buyout for months. He held a 20% stake in the company, the final piece Marcus needed for absolute, unquestionable control. Caldwell was healthy, but he was in his late 60s. A sudden heart attack wouldn't raise nearly as many eyebrows as the others. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that Marcus was going to kill him. We were in a race against time. The breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday night. We had been trying a new catalytic agent, a platinum-based compound that Lena had borrowed from another department. I was monitoring the reaction vessel, watching the pressure gauges. For 3 hours, nothing happened. Then slowly, the solution in the flask began to change, shifting from a murky brown to a clear, almost shimmering liquid. The readings on the monitor stabilized. I ran a quick sample through the chromatograph. The results scrolled onto the screen. It was a perfect match, a 99.9% pure stable antagonist molecule. We had done it. We had created the antidote. I held the small vial up to the light. It contained maybe 20 milliliters of clear fluid. It looked like water. It was the most valuable thing in the world. It was life. It was justice. It was the bullet in my gun. We worked through the rest of the night, turning the liquid into a deliverable form. An injection would be too suspicious. We needed something that could be administered quickly, in a panic, without raising questions. We settled on a sublingual spray, mimicking the design of a nitroglycerin dispenser used by angina patients. It was a perfect disguise. Anyone would assume it was standard emergency medication. I now had the weapon, the proof, and the cure. The only thing left was to set the trap, and I knew Marcus, with his arrogance and his theatrical flair, would provide the perfect stage for me. I just had to wait for the invitation. It wasn't about revenge, I told myself again. But as I held that small, unassuming vial in my hand, I knew that was a lie. I had stopped believing. It was about saving a life, yes, but it was also about the look on my uncle's face when he realized the family disgrace he had created was the architect of his downfall. The first move was a waiting game, and it was the most nerve-wracking part of the entire plan. I had the antidote, a small disguised spray bottle that I now carried with me everywhere in a specially lined pocket of my jacket. It felt both impossibly heavy and reassuringly solid. Lena and I had our proof, the spectral data locked away on encrypted drives, but it was circumstantial. To truly expose Marcus, I couldn't just stop him. I had to catch him in the act. I needed an unimpeachable witness. I needed to save Alistair Caldwell's life in a way that left no doubt as to what had happened. My surveillance of my uncle intensified. I spent my days as a ghost in green overalls, trimming hedges and planting seasonal flowers around the Beaumont Clinic's corporate campus. From my vantage point, I could see the rhythms of power. I saw Caldwell arrive for meetings, his face always grim, his posture rigid. I saw my Uncle Marcus greet him with that wide, false smile, clapping him on the back like an old friend, while his eyes remained as cold as a morgue slab. I learned that Marcus was hosting a small, exclusive dinner for the venture's remaining board members and key investors at a private dining room in a high-end downtown restaurant. It was billed as a celebration of their shared success. I knew what it really was. It was the stage, it was the kill box. Getting in was the first problem. I couldn't just walk through the front door, but my time as an invisible groundskeeper had taught me the geography of service entrances and loading bays. I knew the catering company that Marcus always used, a pretentious outfit that prided itself on its farm-to-table cuisine. A day before the event, I accidentally spilled a potent but harmless organic fertilizer near the catering company's main kitchen exhaust fan. The next day, their kitchen was infested with a swarm of fruit flies attracted to the fermenting odor. I then called them, posing as a freelance, eco-friendly pest control specialist, and offered an immediate, discreet solution. Desperate not to lose the high-profile Beaumont account, they hired me on the spot. I arrived at the restaurant a few hours before the dinner, dressed in a gray jumpsuit with a fake Green Guard Pest Solutions logo on the back. I carried a canister of what I told the manager was a non-toxic, food-safe pheromone trap. In reality, it was just water. My real tools were in a small bag, a set of miniature fiber-optic cameras and audio bugs. While I pretended to spray in the corners of the kitchen and pantry, I was discreetly placing my equipment. One camera was positioned behind a floral arrangement on the main service bar, giving me a clear view of the private dining room. Another was hidden in a ventilation duct overhead. The audio bug went under the lip of the table, where I knew Marcus would be sitting. I finished my work and left through the back, circling around to a coffee shop across the street where I had a laptop and a receiver set up. I watched as the guests arrived. There was my cousin Julian, the golden child, looking smug and self-important in a suit that was too expensive for him. There were a few other investors. And then, Alistair Caldwell arrived, looking weary but resolute. Finally, Marcus made his entrance, the king holding court, all magnanimity and charm. I watched the dinner unfold on my screen, my heart pounding against my ribs. The sound came through my headphones, the clink of silverware, the murmur of conversation. Marcus was a master performer. He was charming, witty, telling stories, pouring expensive wine. He was particularly attentive to Caldwell, refilling his glass, insisting he try the pan-seared scallops. I knew the toxin was colorless and tasteless. It could be in the wine, the water, the food. I scanned every movement, every gesture, looking for the moment of delivery. It came with the coffee service. A waiter brought in a silver tray with a pot of coffee and an array of Demetas cups. But Marcus, with a grand gesture, waved him away from Caldwell. "No, no, Alistair," he said, his voice booming with false bonhomie. "I know you prefer a specific digestive. I took the liberty of ordering it for you." He produced a small ornate bottle of what looked like a rare, artisanal Amaro. He poured a single glass himself, his body momentarily blocking my camera's view of the glass. It was a fractional movement, a second of obscurity, but I knew that was it. He slid the glass in front of Caldwell. "To the future, Alistair," Marcus said, raising his own glass. "May it be long and prosperous for all of us." Caldwell, looking tired of the whole charade, picked up the glass and drank it down in one go. My stomach clenched. I started the timer on my watch. Based on my research, the onset of symptoms would take between 7 and 10 minutes. It would start with a tingling in the lips and a slight dizziness, followed by chest tightness and then full cardiac collapse. I packed up my gear, my hands shaking slightly. I walked out of the coffee shop and crossed the street, my pace measured, my face calm. I entered the restaurant's main lobby, heading for the restrooms, which were located down a corridor past the private dining room. I had to time this perfectly. Too soon, and I'd be a suspicious loiterer. Too late, and Caldwell would be dead. At the 6-minute mark, I saw it through the crack in the dining room door. Caldwell's hand went to his chest. He blinked a few times, a confused look on his face. He shook his head slightly, as if trying to clear it. Marcus was watching him, a faint, almost imperceptible smile on his lips. My cousin Julian was oblivious, droning on about a golf game. At 7 minutes, Caldwell pushed his chair back. "I don't feel well," he stammered, his face pale. He tried to stand, but his legs buckled. He clutched at his heart, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Panic erupted in the room. Julian shouted, "Dad, what's wrong with him?" The other investors leaped to their feet. Marcus was the picture of professional concern. "Someone call 911, he commanded, rushing to Caldwell's side. "It's his heart, lay him down." That was my cue. I burst into the room. "I'm a doctor," I lied, my voice filled with authority. It was the one lie my family would have appreciated. "Let me through." The crowd parted, their faces a mixture of fear and confusion. Marcus looked up, and for a split second, his mask of concern slipped. I saw a flash of pure venomous rage in his eyes when he saw me. "Elias, what the hell are you doing here?" "Saving his life," I said, kneeling beside Caldwell. The man was blue, his body convulsing. I checked his pulse. It was a chaotic, thready mess. Ventricular fibrillation. He had maybe a minute left. "He's in V-fib," I shouted, playing the role. "Has he got any medication, nitro?" Caldwell's wife, who had been at the other end of the table, was hysterical. "I don't know." I didn't wait. I pulled the disguised antidote spray from my pocket. "Found it," I yelled, pretending to have found it in his jacket. I tilted Caldwell's head back, lifted his tongue, and gave him 2 quick sprays of the antidote. Then I started CPR. It was purely for show, to complete the performance. The antidote would work on its own, but I needed to look like I was following protocol. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. I counted, my voice steady, compressing his chest. Marcus stood over me, his face a storm of conflicting emotions. He was horrified that his plan had gone wrong, furious at my presence, and utterly baffled as to what was happening. He had expected Caldwell to die. He had orchestrated the perfect, untraceable murder, and somehow his med school dropout nephew had appeared out of nowhere to interfere. After about 45 seconds of compressions, I felt it. A sudden, strong beat under my hand. Then another. Caldwell's body stopped convulsing. A flicker of color returned to his cheeks. He took a deep, shuddering breath, then another. His eyes fluttered open, filled with confusion and terror. The paramedics burst in moments later, and I stepped back, melting into the crowd of onlookers. I saw the look on my uncle's face. It wasn't relief, it was pure, unadulterated panic. His perfect crime had a witness. His foolproof poison had a cure. And the ghost he had tried to erase had just come back to haunt him in the most spectacular way possible. He looked at me across the room, and in that moment he knew. He didn't know how, but he knew I was responsible. The power dynamic, the one that had defined my entire life, had just irrevocably shifted. The silent takeover of his world had begun. The aftermath of Caldwell's recovery was a quiet, suffocating storm for my uncle. Caldwell spent 2 days in the hospital for observation. The official story, masterfully spun by Marcus and the Beaumont Clinic's PR machine, was that he'd suffered a severe anxiety attack that mimicked a cardiac event. But Caldwell knew better. He remembered the taste of the Amaro, the sudden, terrifying descent into chaos, and the face of the young man who had appeared out of nowhere and saved his life. I visited him on the second day. I didn't have to sneak in this time. Caldwell had left my name at the front desk. He was sitting up in his private room, looking pale but furious. The first thing he said to me was, "It was the drink, wasn't it? That bastard Marcus poured it himself." I just nodded. He did. I spent the next 2 hours telling him everything. I told him about my past, about being disowned, about my research in Patagonia. I showed him the data on my laptop, the spectral analysis from the other victims, the molecular structure of the toxin, and the antidote. I played him the audio I had recorded from the restaurant. By the time I was finished, Caldwell's face was ashen. "He tried to murder me," he whispered, the words sounding alien, in the sterile hospital room, "for my shares." "He succeeded with Jonathan Hayes and Sophia Petrova," I said quietly. "You were just the next name on his list." Alistair Caldwell was a man who had spent 40 years navigating the cutthroat world of business. He was not a man who panicked. He was a man who planned. The fear in his eyes slowly receded, replaced by a cold, calculating fury that I recognized all too well. It was the same fury that had been fueling me for years. "That monster is not getting away with this," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "He's not getting my company. He's not getting another damn thing. What do you need from me, son?" That was the moment the tide truly turned. I was no longer a lone operative. I had a powerful, wealthy, and highly motivated ally. We spent another hour mapping out our strategy. We agreed that going to the police was still too risky. Marcus would bury us in legal challenges and use his reputation to paint me as a disgruntled, unstable nephew and Caldwell as a confused old man who had suffered a hallucination. We needed to dismantle his power base from the inside. While Caldwell recovered, Marcus began to unravel. The news of Caldwell's miraculous recovery, especially with my inexplicable involvement, sent him into a state of barely concealed panic. His arrogance, his primary tool, was failing him. He had no explanation for what had happened. He made a few clumsy attempts to find me, leaving angry, rambling voicemails on my old disconnected phone number. He even drove by my house once, a sleek black sedan moving slowly down my quiet street, a predator suddenly unsure of its territory. His panic made him sloppy. He started calling the other family members, trying to shore up his support, to poison the well against me. This was the part of his playbook I knew by heart. He told my father I had become unhinged, that I had staged the entire event at the restaurant to embarrass the family. He told my mother I was a danger to myself and others. He told my cousin Julian that I was jealous of his success and was trying to sabotage the family business. But for the first time, his manipulations didn't have the desired effect. The story of what happened at the restaurant had spread like wildfire through the city's elite circles. The official version was thin, and people were whispering. Why had Caldwell collapsed so violently, and how had the family Disgrace been the one to save him? My uncle's desperate attempts to control the narrative only made him look more guilty. This is when the family exodus began. It wasn't a dramatic walkout. It was a slow, quiet retreat. It started with my aunt, Marcus's own sister. She was a quiet woman who had always lived in the shadow of her powerful brothers. She called me, her voice trembling. She said Marcus was scaring her, that he seemed erratic and paranoid. She wanted to know what was really going on. I didn't tell her everything, just enough. I told her that Marcus had put the family in a dangerous position and that she should protect herself and her assets. A week later, her husband, a cautious accountant, quietly moved all of their shared investments out of the Beaumont-managed funds. My cousin Julian was the next to crack, though not out of any moral conviction. His entire identity was tied to the power and prestige of his father. As Marcus became more frantic, Julian became more insecure. He saw the whispers, the sideways glances at the country club. He heard from his friends that Caldwell was telling people Marcus was unstable. Julian's world was built on the foundation of his father's infallibility. With that foundation cracking, he panicked. He started drinking more, making foolish mistakes at the hospital, lashing out at nurses. He was a reflection of his father's decaying authority. The most significant shift came from my own father. He didn't call me, he wouldn't allow himself that vulnerability. But my mother did. She called me late one night, her voice choked with tears. It wasn't the shaming, hysterical crying I was used to. It was the crying of a woman who was terrified. "Elias," she said, "your uncle, he's saying terrible things. He came to the house last night, demanding your father sign some papers, some power of attorney. He said it was to protect the family assets from you. Your father refused. I've never seen them fight like that." Marcus looked unhinged. "What is happening?" My uncle, in his desperation, had overplayed his hand. He had tried to consolidate his control over the family's personal wealth, and in doing so, he had revealed the true nature of his greed. He wasn't protecting the family, he was looting it before it sank. "Stay away from him, Mom," I said, my voice firm but gentle. "Don't sign anything. Don't trust him, just for a little while. Please." For the first time in years, she listened to me. The family, this monolithic entity that had cast me out, was fracturing under the weight of one man's guilt. They weren't flocking to my side, not yet. They were simply running for cover, abandoning the man who they now sensed was radioactive. The power Marcus had always wielded came from the family's unified belief in his superiority. I hadn't needed to defeat them all. I just had to isolate him. Stripped of his chorus of enablers, my uncle was just a man, alone in a room, screaming into the void. The power had shifted. The stage was now set for the final act. The final confrontation was a masterpiece of corporate theater, orchestrated by Alistair Caldwell. 2 weeks after the incident at the restaurant, he used his authority as a board member to call an emergency meeting of the joint venture's executive board. The stated purpose was to discuss recent leadership instabilities and future corporate governance. The invitation was sent to everyone, the remaining investors, the legal team, my uncle Marcus, and at Caldwell's insistence, a special consultant on corporate risk, me. The meeting was held in the main boardroom on the top floor of the Beaumont Clinic, the heart of my uncle's empire. It was a space designed to intimidate, with a massive mahogany table, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and portraits of my grandfather and great-grandfather staring down from the walls. It was the same room where, years ago, Marcus had celebrated his appointment as CEO, a party to which I had not been invited. I arrived with Caldwell, we walked in together, and the room fell silent. Marcus was already there, flanked by my cousin Julian and the family's lawyer. When he saw me, his face went rigid with a fury he could barely contain. The other board members looked on, their expressions a mixture of confusion and nervous anticipation. "What is the meaning of this, Alistair?" Marcus snarled, his voice dangerously low. "What is he doing here? This is a private meeting." Caldwell took his seat at the head of the table, opposite Marcus. He placed his briefcase on the table and clicked it open. "Elias Beaumont is here at my invitation," he said, his voice as cold and hard as granite. "He is here as a material witness to the attempt on my life." A wave of shocked murmurs went through the room. The lawyer started to protest, but Caldwell held up a hand, silencing him. Marcus, 2 weeks ago, you tried to murder me. You served me a drink poisoned with a highly sophisticated, undetectable neurotoxin. You did this to acquire my shares and gain total control of this company. You would have succeeded were it not for the intervention of your nephew. Marcus laughed, a harsh, barking sound that didn't reach his eyes. This is insane. Alistair, you had a panic attack. The doctors confirmed it. My nephew is a disgraced medical school dropout with a history of instability. He's a compulsive liar who has been stalking my family for years. This is a pathetic, desperate attempt to smear my name. He was good. He was projecting confidence, outrage, the performance of an innocent man wronged. But his eyes kept flicking towards me, betraying the panic underneath. Is that so? I said, speaking for the first time. My voice was calm, steady. I had rehearsed this moment in my head 1,000 times. Then perhaps you can explain this. I nodded to Lena, who had been waiting outside. She entered the room, carrying a projector and a laptop. She was introduced as a consulting biochemist. The family lawyer objected strenuously, but Caldwell overruled him. Lena set up the projector, and the spectral analysis graphs flashed onto the large screen behind Marcus. What you're looking at, I explained, walking slowly along the side of the table, is a comparative protein analysis of cardiac tissue. This sample on the left is from a healthy heart. These two on the right are from Jonathan Hayes and Sophia Petrova. I let their names hang in the air. You'll notice this specific protein marker here and here. It's a unique signature of cellular decay caused by a very specific alkaloid, aconitine NC. It comes from a plant I discovered in Patagonia 6 years ago, a discovery you stole from my personal research files via a hack originating from this very building. Marcus was on his feet now, his face purple with rage. This is a fabrication, forged data. He's a lunatic. The data is real, Lena said, her voice cutting through his tirade. And it is verifiable. We have the original tissue samples, and we are prepared to submit them and our methodology for independent review. Caldwell then played his trump card. He pressed a button on a small remote, and the audio from the restaurant filled the room. We all heard Marcus's voice, full of false friendship. No, Alistair, I know you prefer a specific digestive. I took the liberty of ordering it for you. The sound of him pouring the drink, his toast. It wasn't a confession, but in the context of everything else, it was damning. Marcus stared at the speakers as if he could will them to silence. He looked around the table, seeking an ally, but all he saw were horrified, accusing faces. Even Julian looked pale, finally understanding the depth of his father's depravity. Then I delivered the final blow. The toxin is real, Uncle, I said, my voice dropping to an almost conversational tone. I know because I'm the one who figured out how to synthesize it. But here's the interesting thing about understanding how a poison works. It also means you're the only one who can figure out how to create the antidote. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small sublingual spray bottle. I placed it gently on the polished mahogany table. It looked tiny and insignificant in the vast room. This is it, I said. The world's entire supply. Enough for about 20 doses. The only thing on the planet that can reverse the effects of your poison. I looked directly at him. His eyes were wide with dawning horror. He finally understood. So here is the new reality, I continued, my voice devoid of emotion. You are going to resign as CEO of the Beaumont Clinic and as chairman of this board, effective immediately. You are going to place your entire portfolio, including all shares in this venture, into a blind trust managed by Mr. Caldwell, with the profits directed to a new foundation for victims of corporate and medical fraud, a foundation that will be run by Lena Petrova. You will do this silently, citing personal health reasons. In exchange, this evidence will not be turned over to the police. The formula for the antidote will remain my property, licensed exclusively to a single pharmaceutical company for development and distribution. You will live out your days in quiet disgrace. If you refuse, or if anyone else who holds a stake in this company suddenly develops an unexpected heart condition, this antidote will not be available. I will personally ensure it. It was an ultimatum, confession and ruin, or exposure in prison, with the added threat of his own weapon being used against him. The room was deathly quiet. All the power, all the prestige, all the generational authority he had wielded his entire life had just evaporated and reformed in a small vial on the table in front of him. He stared at the vial, then at me. The hatred in his eyes was absolute, but so was the defeat. He knew he was beaten. He had no moves left. He slowly, deliberately, sank back into his chair. He looked old, shrunken, a hollowed-out version of the titan he had pretended to be. "You win," he whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. I just nodded. It was never a game. They called me the family disgrace, but in the end, I was the only one who understood the true meaning of the physician's oath. First, do no harm, and if harm is done, you fix it. The Beaumont legacy wasn't in the name, or the building, or the money. It was in the knowledge, and he had used it to kill, while I had used it to heal. The new reality had arrived. In the weeks that followed, the new reality settled in like a quiet, cleansing rain. Marcus did exactly as he was told. He resigned, citing exhaustion and a desire to spend more time with his family. A bitter irony that was not lost on me. His shares and assets were transferred to the newly formed Petrova Hayes Foundation. The news sent a shockwave through the city's medical and financial communities, but the official story held. Alistair Caldwell, with his reputation for shrewdness, stepped in as interim chairman, ensuring a smooth transition. The Beaumont dynasty, as the world knew it, was over. My family reacted in predictable ways. My mother was mortified by the public disgrace, but secretly relieved to be out from under Marcus's thumb. My father retreated into a stony silence, unable to reconcile the son he had written off with the man who had just dismantled his brother's empire. We still don't speak, but a few weeks ago, I received a small, unsigned check in the mail for the exact amount of my first-year medical school tuition. It was his way of apologizing, I think, or maybe it was his way of trying to buy back a piece of his own honor. I never cashed it. My cousin Julian had a complete breakdown. Stripped of his father's power and protection, he was exposed as the mediocre, entitled man he had always been. He was quietly let go from the Beaumont Clinic for performance issues. The last I heard, he was selling luxury cars, still trying to live a life he felt he was owed. As for me, I didn't take over the hospital. I didn't want it. That world of prestige and power was never my world. Instead, I found my own path. The pharmaceutical company that Lena and I partnered with paid a fortune for the exclusive rights to the Antidote, which they named Elias Teen, in my honor. A little private joke for us. With my share of the money, I bought the old greenhouse and the land it sat on. I expanded it, building a proper, world-class research facility dedicated to ethnobotany and the discovery of new medicinal compounds from rare plants. I call it the Gideon Institute, in memory of the old man my uncle had treated with such disdain. It's a place where science serves people, not egos. Lena runs her foundation with the same fierce intelligence she applied to our plan. She's a force of nature, taking on corporate giants and winning justice for people like her father. We're still partners, in a way. Her foundation funds some of my expeditions, and my lab provides her with research to support her cases. We created our own legacy, one built on truth, not on a name. It's funny, for years, I let my family's definition of me become my own. I was the disgrace, the failure, the one who couldn't handle the pressure. I believed it, but their pressure was the pressure of a mold, forcing me into a shape that wasn't my own. When I finally broke out of it, I found my own strength, my own value, on my own terms. It wasn't about revenge in the end, not really. It was about reclaiming my own story. My uncle tried to steal my work and use it for evil, but in doing so, he gave me the one thing I never had, a purpose. He showed me exactly who I didn't want to be. So here's what I want you to take away from all this. The world, and sometimes even your own family, will try to tell you who you are. They'll hand you a script, a role they expect you to play. They'll tell you your worth is tied to their expectations, their traditions, their definition of success. But your value isn't something that can be given to you or taken away by others. It's something you build yourself, with your own passions, your own skills, your own integrity. Don't ever let anyone else write your story. Find your own silent heart's flower, not to harm, but to understand. Find the thing that only you can do, and do it with all your might. That's where your true power lies. Not in a name, not in a building, but in the quiet, undeniable truth of who you are. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever felt like the black sheep or the family disgrace, I hope this gives you a little bit of strength. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had to deal with a family member who just refused to see your true worth. I read all the comments, and I find a lot of strength in your stories too. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, and subscribe for more stories about finding your power in unexpected places. Take care of yourselves and each other.